When a rising flood threatened Lois Ryder's home, she didn't evacuate. She didn't buy sandbags. Instead, she did something much simpler. Lois had a talk with the river.
It's been a tough decade for 75-year-old Lois Ryder of Rainier, Oregon. She and her family were running this RV park and marina when the Columbia River flooded its banks in 1996.
That afternoon of February, about the 6th or 7th, the water came over the bank, and it came fast, really fast, because it started over the bank at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and by 10 o'clock that night we had about 5 feet of water out here.
Floodwaters filled the RV parking area and their small convenience store, causing about $200,000 damage. But Lois is a fighter, and together the family rebuilt what had been washed out in the '96 flood. But then, 10 years later, it began to happen again. This is the Columbia River. It's the second largest river in the United States, and it sits in Lois's backyard. So when the record rains began to fall on Oregon in December and January, the river started to rise again. And Lois began to ask herself whether she was going to see the same kind of devastation that she had seen a decade before.
Every day it was raining, and on the news they were talking about it all the time. The Columbia was flooding in various and sundry spots. Right across the river from us here is Kalama, Washington, and there's an RV park over in Kalama, and it was underwater.
So Lois began to pray.
I said, Lord, I can't go through this again. I did this 10 years ago. My husband is in the hospital again, and we didn't even know if he would live. And here all of a sudden the water is coming up, and all these things are happening, and it's just a déjà vu all over again.
But the waters continued to rise, so much so that this floating dock and walkway, which normally sit at this angle, were sitting level with the parking lot. The river was about to flood its banks again.
The water was coming up every single day. It was an inch or two deeper coming up the boat launch over there, which is where I can measure how deep it was. And I just thought, I just can't do this.
Early in January, Alice said she received an important package in the mail, a book that would change the way she thought about prayer and miracles.
I was just so discouraged, and he had been talking about the book on the 700 Club that morning, and I thought, boy, I wish that book had come out. I'd like to read it. And lo and behold, I got it in the mail.
Lois had actually gotten an early copy of Pat Robertson's book, Miracles, because she's a 700 Club partner.
And then I sat up about half of that night reading over half of the book, and when I got to page 46, where it told about him dealing with Hurricane Esther, I said, this is what is happening to me. And then a couple of pages farther than that, why he tells about when Mrs. Robertson went over to Taiwan with that group of missionaries, and they had to deal with the typhoon over there. This time I thought, I can't go through this again, so I've got to do something that's going to keep it from happening.
That something was a trip down to the river the next morning after a time of prayer.
And I had a talk with the good Lord, and I had a talk with the river, and I said, you cannot come any higher than you are right now. You can go down and you can come back up to this place, but you cannot go 1 inch higher.
You actually spoke to the river?
I sure did.
In fact, Lois showed me the precise line that she commanded the river not to cross. And
it stopped. And it never went higher. Every day, every morning when I came down, I went and looked at the river. Every evening before I left, I went and looked at the river to make sure that it was behaving itself, and it never went over the spot where it was when I said you can't come any higher.
And to this day, the water has not risen above that line, in spite of the fact that it rained and flooded in nearby locations for weeks afterwards.
And it kept flooding all around us here. It flooded in Portland, it flooded in Oregon City, but the Columbia River at Gobel never came any higher than it was when I said you can't come any higher.
And as for the skeptics out there, and there have been a few, what does Lois say to them?
I know a lot of people would say, oh, well, it just happened, but I don't think so, because I've been through this before, and it was doing exactly the same thing that it did in '96. I think it's a little like Pat said with the hurricane. The Lord's hand was there and kept it from going any farther, because it didn't make sense otherwise, because everybody else was flooding.
So Lois and the family keep pressing on, confident in the miracle that God did for them. Do you believe in miracles?
Yes, definitely. I've always believed in miracles, but I've never had anything happen quite in the way that made me feel like I was right in the middle of a miracle. I believe that it's really necessary to have faith. You don't have to talk a lot, you don't have to do a lot, but you gotta mean what you say and you gotta believe in it.
Lois Ryder, you know, she picked up a principle, it's in the Bible. God gave us authority. He gave us dominion over the earth. In the early covenant that God made with mankind, he says, have dominion. Well, a dominion means that you can address a storm and tell it to stop. Jesus did. He told waves to settle down. He told wind to stop blowing, and it obeyed him. And people were astounded. What manner of man is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? Well, in his name, the elements must obey us. And Lois, God bless her, took it literally, that this means what it says, and she exercised the authority that she has in God. It's just that simple. And the river did not rise past the line appointed. Isn't that great?
And some of what really spoke that kind of faith into her heart was reading about those principles and the books that she'd received from the 700 Club.
Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. It's just that simple. But this is what happened. It was our testimony of a hurricane. Everybody laughs and laughs and laughs about turning back a hurricane, but we've got it on record. It happened. All right.